Oliver, it seems like we can't get enough of each other. Getting back to back of these.
It's been relentless, like
Uh,
the British summer that you're
right?
experiencing.
I mean, I guess while I'm in town, just the proximity alone is getting it to work. So, looking forward to another exciting chat with another really exciting guest today. I'll introduce Greg Perry. He has some great experience for people who operate their own warehouses, have dealt with 3PLs, a lot of stuff on the kind of logistics fulfillment side. So, Greg, maybe I'll let you introduce yourself. What's your experience? And yeah, what are we talking about today?
Sure. Thanks, Kabir. So yes, Greg Perry. I am currently the Senior Director of E-commerce Logistics at Open Farm, a Canadian pet food brand based out of Toronto. Been in the e-com space for 10 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about. So, been with the big box, the small startup player before, the mid-size. Like you mentioned, run my own operation, dabbled in the 3PL world as well. So kind of got my hands on everything when it comes to e-com logistics.
Yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of the listeners and e-commerce brands we've worked with, it's a question they ask themselves. Should I do in-house fulfillment? At what point does it make sense to do a 3PL? And then what are some of those deciding factors? So maybe I'd love to start there. You've done both. You've kind of run your own warehouse. You've worked with a wide array of 3PLs. What are some of the kind of pros and cons you see of each option?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start on the in-house side, Kabir. When I think back on my experience, I think, one of the most key things if you're running your own warehouse is just like you have control over the operation. You can do whatever you want, right? You want to change a process from A to B in the span of a day, go for it. You've got a lot of customization required in your your products. Maybe you're trying to elevate the customer experience to a new level and, it's just going to be too many touches or too high cost to go with 3PL. I think even if you Google this, it's probably like the number one talking point that comes up, but it really is true, right? When I was shipping jewelry a few years ago, Mejuri, it was extremely high touch, right? We were doing engravings. You've got new SKUs launching every single Monday. It's better to have full control over everything as opposed to trying to outsource that to a 3PL and in various markets, and there's all kinds of complications that come with that. I think as like point number one, probably a good place to start. You know, I think as well, like to just to build on that is like it allows you to be nimble as well. When you've got maybe some seasonality, we've got big sales outside of Black Friday, whatever the case might be. Just having things in house really does allow you to react quickly, maintain control over your products, over your process as well, and even your staff, right? Who's packing, who's picking, who's managing the process. You've got your hands on the whole operation from A to Z.
And like just a contrast on that, where have you had experiences where you have been outsourced and you've gone to try and do something? Like what kind of things have you tried where you've then found a partner's too inflexible or not fast enough, and you've been like, wish I had this under my own control right now?
Yeah, I mean, hey, depending on the 3PL, some are quicker than others, I would say. And I think it depends on the ask as well, Oliver. Let's say you're trying to launch a couple new carriers. They might already have them in portfolio. You're just not using them. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. But, when it comes to things like maybe rule customization of, I don't want product A to ship with product B. And then, it's going to be, we're going to have to scope it out, have to come up with, scope of work. Here's the estimated budget. Here's the estimated amount of hours it's going to take. And, if you had that in-house, it might just be a setting in your ERP somewhere, or, maybe your own dev team can flush that out in a quicker amount of time.
It's always going to be a WMS disconnected from your core ERP, right? If you're doing it outsourced, and like often I find the WMS needs to be more generic. because they're designed for all different types of clients. Like, assuming the kind of scale you've been working, you've had a dedicated space within it, but they're likely running you on a multi-tenant WMS, and then you're not in the control panel of that, knowing like what levers you can pull on to do certain things anyway. So you kind of got to trust what they say when it comes to some things.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I said, like there's so many 3PLs out there in this day and age with the, growth that we've seen in e-com over the last few years, but some are very technologically advanced and others maybe not so much. So, you really got to do your homework before jumping in with them as well.
It's a hard bit. I think that, I was going to say, that part of the tender process, I think that's really hard, because often if people haven't run their own warehouse, they're going to tender on a 3PL. They don't know what it's like to run their own warehouse. They maybe even don't have a warehouse management system. So I often find, like, really simple thing that I think catches a lot of people out is not being able to put orders on hold with their 3PL. So if you do something like pre-orders, you have to hold them in Shopify and make sure they don't go to the 3PL, and then you need a mechanism to release them later. So those kinds of scenarios, like, you just wouldn't think to go into the detail of, like, can you put an order on hold in your integration spec? When you're selecting them on so many factors, it's not really something that could tip things, but it definitely catches people out.
Right. You'd think hold would be the bare bones, but then don't even get started on any order adjustments or anything like that. And that's been an interesting change in the dynamic, is that, to Greg's point, there are a lot of these new age 3PLs, and their whole value proposition is what they're claiming to be the tech. And we're building our own platforms, we're doing the order routing. And so that's like on one end of the spectrum, where you've got this, sure, best in breed is what they're claiming of, like, tech. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where they might be using paper, or they're using some old DOS system that is made for retail operations and not for D2C operations. So I think that you'll find 3PLs across that spectrum, and there are different red flags that can help you maybe not make the same mistake twice, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kabir. Like, I think we've all seen those ones where, the WMS looks like it's, when the movies like try to make something look really fancy. It's like this guy hacking, is just mashing on a keyboard, and there's all kinds of stuff popping up on the screen. Like, you see those, you're like, okay, but like, what does this actually do? Versus the complete opposite, which is like, well, this is from like 1995, and the scanner I have to use is literally the size of a brick. There's definitely a middle ground to be had in there.
And I think that one of the things you mentioned is that having run your own warehouse, or having familiarity, can make you a lot more attuned to what some of those red flags are. Like, you can go show up at a warehouse and immediately see, oh, just based on how they're doing this one simple process, that's a big red flag to me. And like, having that knowledge yourself, or working with someone who has that knowledge, can save you a lot of headache down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thankful to my experience. I've done some lean training as well in my day. So you're right. Like, I could walk into a warehouse tomorrow and be like, why are your fastest moving products on the opposite end of the warehouse? Like, what are you doing? Move those closer to your packing stations. And yeah, I mean, I think, now that I think of it, on the 3PL side, and Oliver, you mentioned like the multi-client warehouse as well, right? Like, something that's I was thinking about before I jumped on was, the in-house versus 3PL part. When you're in-house, you manage your own capacity, right? If you're like, oh crap, I'm running out of space, we got to get a new warehouse. If your 3PL is running low on capacity, you might be in trouble, right? Depends how kind of high or low you are on the totem pole, where, yeah, like, even though it's a fastest moving product, it's going to be in the back corner of the warehouse because they don't really care. I'm not going to say it's not like because they don't know what they're doing. Hopefully that's not true. But, again, the 3PL side of things, there's small, there's medium, there's large. It really is all about finding the right fit if you do go that route.
Yeah, I think what's interesting you mentioned is, usually when I talk to brands about how they think about the 3PL versus in-house conversation, it's actually the one benefit of the 3PL they flag is the flexibility. you're talking about the maybe other side to that coin, which can be the negative. But in terms of 3PLs, like you can ramp up, ramp down. It's their problem to figure out staffing. If you have a sale coming up, or they need a new fulfillment node, or they need more space, you can just get another 3PL to augment. Versus if you own it, you having to sign another rent, like another lease, that's difficult. You having to hire and staff up, that's difficult. So, to your point, it gives you more ownership, and you can take control of what that looks like, and you can make sure it's being done right. But there is actually more work involved to doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've set up my own warehouse in Toronto, which is obviously not the cheapest market to do so. Um, it'd be the same in the US, Let's say you want to find a space in New Jersey. Well, good luck and get the checkbook ready, right? Then you got to retrofit the building and it doesn't fit your spec and whatever. It needs a new lunchroom, right? Like the cost could just blow up very quickly on you. So yeah, I mean, it is a fair point. Like a good 3PL will have a solid network of warehouses. And, I'm not saying you need to be in 10. 2 might be more than enough for you, depending on where they're located and, what kind of shipping speed you're looking for. So yeah, it definitely is, a strong suit for them. It's just a much lower upfront cost to getting started. And yeah, if you do hit a sales lull or whatever, maybe you can, pack one in and go from 3 to 2 or down to 1 or whatever the case might be.
Should we talk a little bit about like different verticals and like where they suit 3PL versus not 3PL? And I think like an interesting contrast for me is like the difference between if you're in the UK, how that influences decisions around whether to go 3PL or in-house. Like we see many verticals will run things in-house till quite late, like for fashion apparel in particular. You can go, there's brands I can think of who have gone to 100 million with one warehouse in the UK shipping globally. And then normally the tipping point now is this whole Brexit thing that happened. So we got blue passports, but we have to have a separate warehouse in the UK. So that's driven up a lot of adoption for 3PL. But yeah, fashion apparel seems to be one that's strong with in-house, because certainly in the early days, because a lot of brands do that like spike in demand where they have a big Black Friday and then they ride off the back of that, all those big sale events. Or I even worked with a client where they closed their warehouse and their website permanently, and then they open it, so it's got like a password on it, and then they open the store for like 72 hours, and then they take all the orders within 72 hours and they shut the website again and then fulfill everything out. And jewelry is probably another one, right? It's just a good one to fulfill in-house. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's very high touch. At least the model I was working on was very high touch. There's other brands out there that, do work with a 3PL, and it's much more of a drop the item in a box, throw a shipping label on it, and out the door it goes, right? It's nothing fancy. But, when you're doing some in-house assembly, you're doing some kitting, not even straightforward kitting either, right? Like it's much more complex, and it's requires a certain level of expertise as well, and training, right? And you had mentioned this, Oliver, like trying to scale for, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday events of the world. That's a challenge in and of itself, especially when you're in-house, right? Depending on how big your sales spike is at that time of year. It could be a lot of people to train. You might have to bring in more management. You might have to bring in more, ground level staff. It's a lot.
Advent calendars as well. That's the other one in jewelry, right? The sort of advent calendar boost that you see like beginning of December. Like you can almost organize your whole warehouse around those big spikes in demand. Because like I did a warehouse. They're actually called Watch Warehouse, and they sold watches. And I remember they were like 10 million turnover, and I went to the warehouse, and it was probably about the size of my office that I'm stood in. Yeah. And I was like, what? Is this it? And it's like, yeah, like there's like loads of watches in here. You don't need a ton of space, which is kind of eye-opening. You wouldn't even think about it when you're starting a brand. Like, how much storage space am I going to need?
Yeah. And it snowballs quickly too, right? Like you could start off in that, like, operating out of your closet, but as you launch more SKUs and, if you do need, I'm making this up, 20 people for Black Friday, they're not going to fit in that closet anymore. And you're not going to be able to pick any orders.
Have them outside on the driveway. What about like what do you think's the worst to try and fulfill yourself? Like what would you just never touch?
That's a good question. What would I never want to touch?
I've got a couple of good candidates that I want to hear. I want to hear yours first.
I'm curious to see where your brain's at.
I think furniture that comes in multiple boxes, the messiest warehouses I've ever seen were ones where you'd have like let's say there was a tape it's furniture, and then when things come in these multiple boxes, then you get like batch numbers where they make exactly the same table in the next season, but they change like the legs. So then you need certain legs to go with certain tabletops. And it just always seems to end up in a mess. They just end up with so much stock everywhere of like different parts and components, and it just doesn't store well. You've got to basically have open pallet spaces, and there's stuff thrown in there, and the boxes get damaged. It always looks like hell on earth whenever I've been in those warehouses.
I definitely agree with you on the potential risk, but there is upside if you do run your own fulfillment for those brands, because shipping costs are such a high like impact to your margin, where if you can really dial that in, and the way you can dial that in is if you are the one doing the packing, the assembly, and like figuring out, okay, if I adjust this, make the box smaller, like if you have a really good 3PL, maybe they'll help you optimize that. But otherwise, you owning that and being able to really make sure you're juicing the most out of what's in that box, how am I minimizing my shipping costs? Because we have a few like mattress brands or like bed frames, things like that they sell, which are exactly what you're describing. Incredibly difficult to kind of get their workflows optimized. Something I like to believe Fulfil WMS can do, but it is hard to manage. But if you get it right, they can start saying, oh, if I ship with this carrier, if I do this, I can save a pretty substantial portion of my margin, because it's a lot.
I mean, that might be my view. Might be like we're effectively a state when you look at the size of North America. So like within the state of the UK, what you've ended up with is like specialist logistics partners who do the warehousing for furniture. Like they'll do all the sofa brands, and then they've got their own fleet of delivery vehicles. So they'll do the delivery and the proof of delivery and all of that stuff. So they wrap it all together into a single service. Whereas there's no way that that's how it's playing out in the US. I'm sure you're using much bigger like generic freight carriers and stuff out the other side.
Yeah, I think the nuance of UK is interesting, especially on the sizing of the US. Like when you have to travel distances with these large boxes, it's tough. Another benefit of jewelry. And I think it's Sean at the Ridge who always talks about this, is like doing some of these larger items. It's like, it's just harder inherently. When you can ship things small, you have a lot more flexibility, and a 20% increase in shipping isn't going to make a huge difference, especially if you have a high value product. If you're doing low value or low margin and it's large, I mean, good luck.
Yeah. And I think, to answer your question, Oliver, something that comes to mind, and, furniture is a good one. I can definitely see how that would get messy. For some reason, like just appliances is popping into my mind. Like just trying to ship out, like, I don't know who manufactures their own like dishwashers or washers and dryers, but like, I just feel like that, people already hate that delivery experience as is. Oh, I got to stay home. I need to schedule an appointment with carrier XYZ. And like anything big and bulky is just naturally tough. I feel like, so, I think if I could steer clear of that,
you've almost got no choice. I've seen like people have almost had no choice with like bathrooms and like bathrooms. There's a few like really successful premium bathroom companies in the UK now, and there's been a lot of like people trying to crack bathrooms as a category, where they sort of pop up, and people in at all different levels. Private equity have bought a few. They've ended up in the bin because they couldn't just get it to be efficient and work. So that's another one where they always seem to end up running their own warehouse. But I think there's a temptation there that they try and get a bit too clever. Like you have, say you're going to renovate your bathroom, you need the bathroom on a certain date. So then you're like storing product for people that you're not going to send to them quite yet. And all of that sort of stuff starts to happen. Gets pretty messy. Certainly messy without the right systems, which a lot of them haven't had, thinking back to when I've been in bathroom warehouses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have a bit of a hot take, because I would have actually said, Greg, maybe before this conversation, was like food and dealing with cold storage. So I'm curious some of the complexities that you've had to deal with that, because like lot tracking, managing freezers, and like the additional complexity of dealing with that supply chain can be hard. I'd imagine you learned the hard way.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I'd like to think on the lot control side, like a lot of 3PLs have this down to a science now, right? Like, as long as, call it fresh frozen food is like their bread and butter, that is their main line of business, they will take care of it for you. It shouldn't be too much of a worry, at least in my mind. Right? Again, like if you're working with maybe less than stellar partner and they lose lots or they've got wrong info or whatever the case might be, like that's obviously a red flag. Like that can't happen in the food service industry at all. And when it comes to like fridges and freezers, again, I think the space has just expanded so much over the last few years that there's a lot of expertise available in the space now. Like the likes of your Hello Freshes of the world, the frozen warehouses has got this figured out. There's refrigerated trucks driving around the streets of the city all over the place now. And even things like packaging have come a long way, right? Like your box and your liner insulation are much more robust than they used to be. So, despite the fact it might be 40 degrees Celsius outside, you don't have to worry about your product as long as you've, done your homework and done some testing and you're confident in the packaging you're sending it out in.
Shifting back towards some of the things that brands underestimate when they're making any of these transitions, maybe starting with in-house fulfillment. Like, were there certain challenges that you experienced that you didn't expect or surprises you faced along the way?
Yeah. I think in hindsight, like I'm kind of lucky that when, I did a big warehouse expansion move, it was before the pandemic and like costs really started blowing up. But I think, if you are going to go the in-house route and you're going to do it yourself, you found a nice location, you got your lease signed, like, well, whatever budget you have, I don't want to say double it, but expect that to go up. I think it's super important that you before you put any shovel in the ground or retrofit or anything, you have a rock solid floor plan that you're confident in that is, barring any sort of rocket ship scale, going to last you a couple of years. The last thing you want to do is move into this new space and then you're like, oh, well, we don't have enough packing room anymore, so that wall's coming down. We need to install AC over here, and well, so much for the break area. Eat at your desk. Like it's not great for your employees, and not great for your bottom line, obviously either. So I think that's super important. And again, like just from what I've heard, like just expect delays as well, whether it be permits you might need to build, getting contractors, getting supplies. Right, I'm sure some of the supply issues might be better than they were a few years ago, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to set up your own facility. So, I think you just have to go in like very clear cut plan, but just expect your timelines might shift around a bit, right? So don't move too close to Black Friday. That is my one word of advice.
I think the killer ones I've always seen are like leaky roofs. They seem to be like way more common than you imagine, like leak in the roof. I don't know if that's a global warehouse issue. And then the other one is like patchy Wi-Fi. So going the budget route when it comes to Wi-Fi and then sending a team out fully mobile on handhelds, and you've not gone and done like put full redundancy in. And ultimately, if you're going mobile, which every warehouse should be, if that goes down, systems down, people lose connection or whatever, it's a killer.
Redundancy is definitely key. Yeah. Don't cheap out on your internet.
Yeah. Wi-Fi is incredibly important for any modern WMS, and that's the stupidest reason to get halted. So a definite mistake I see. That's the other one, thinking about power lines, like making sure you're set up for the packing stations and anything else. And I mean, the big one I see is when people are moving into a new facility and they now have a ton more space, they don't rethink their processes from the ground up. They just take their current processes and say, great, I have more space to do those same processes. It's like, no, you clearly need to change things. Space is not the only constraint. If you're scaling, you need to reimagine what your picking workflow is, what your replenishment workflow is, how you're going to be optimizing this. And with a new facility, that is the best opportunity to do that thinking. And people, because there's so many moving parts when you're moving spaces, like I have to deal with a leaky roof and contractors and certifications and whatever, they actually skip that part, which is the most important part of how am I going to reimagine my actual workflows for this new space.
Yeah, it's definitely a fresh start. It's a good point, right? Like, and Oliver, to go back to that watch company, they're operating out of a closet and now they've got whatever 50,000 square feet. Well, you're not going to be able to pick and pack in the same spot. You're going to have to do some walking, and your step counter is going to go up. But I think that's spot on, Kabir. It's a great opportunity to like kind of take a 30,000 foot view, look pretty far in advance. Because again, like the last thing you want to do is take all this new space, copy and paste your current process, and then you just fill up your floor with inventory or stuff you don't need or stuff you haven't touched in 3 years and you're just moving it because you don't want to throw it out. It's a great opportunity to reset, optimize, and reach out for help as well, right? Like there's thousands, if not more, of brands, of people who have gone through this before. You're not the only one who is moving into a new facility and setting things up for the first time. So, it's definitely a good opportunity to leverage your network and your partners and just, get outside expertise as well.
Yeah, it's surprisingly common that it's system change as well. When the warehouse move happens, it's like warehouse system coming in. So I think a lot of people do try and think like that. It's like, do we either move to a 3PL or do we keep going ourselves? And if we keep going ourselves, we need to put a system in when we do this move. But it certainly makes it fun getting stock take organised and putting the new warehouse in and then everybody learning a new system. But it's just the way some of these projects are with the seasonal calendar that we have to run. It always ends up a bit crunchy, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, people use that. They kind of need that forcing function of Black Friday. But then to your point, they get up against way too close to it. And then now you're right up against the timeline and, I need all these new processes. And the other part is we're talking about scaling and needing new processes. You need different processes during Black Friday. Like the scale, you shouldn't assume you can just do the same thing, but with more people for 10x the scale. I think, Greg, you're pretty familiar with that, with some of the brands you've worked with and how Black Friday can really be changed. Like, how did you think about that? Did you reimagine your processes for those busy seasons?
Yeah, I think for a lot of brands, like, the option is, well, I'm just going to throw more people at it, right? And I'm fully guilty of doing that before. Lesson learned. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I can think of before is just like, because your order volume is so much higher, like your picking area becomes so much more congested, right? So if you do have a couple of top sellers and they're all in one bin, there's no way 20 people are going to access that one location at the same time. It's just physically not possible. Right. So you got to start thinking, okay, well, maybe I need to spread out my top selling SKUs a bit more. Maybe I need to optimize my pick path, right? Maybe there's some seasonality involved and whatever was in your top picking section in the winter doesn't sell in the summer, vice versa. There's all kinds of things like that. Your packing process, right? Is it just like drop the product in a box, tape it shut and go? Can you look at automation there as well, right? Auto tapers exist. If you're just having somebody tape a box shut all the time for 8 hours a day, it's pretty boring for the poor guy. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely lots of opportunity out there to just like, also lean into Black Friday and use it as an opportunity to like start leveling up for future years as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense and couldn't agree more. I think that one of the exciting things or maybe mistakes people make is the new shiny object when dealing with fulfillment and warehouses. So there's a lot of new tech. I went to Manifest last year and they've got all these robotics companies. And people have been talking about robotics in warehouses for years and saying robots are going to run your warehouse. And Amazon's finally started to do some things there. But if you're not going to invest in a brand new space that's optimized for robots, like, let's be honest, you're not like introducing robots. Generally speaking, things are going to still be human driven. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've seen anything else, or Oliver, if you've seen anything else, but like still run by humans. I think there is some new tech that is actually out there that is finally, and tech that's been talked about for 10 years, but that is actually being adopted and is adding value. So, Greg, one of the examples is I think you implemented it at one of your previous companies was RFID. I'm finally seeing more adoption of that.
Yep.
Talk to us about kind of your decision-making process there, and if you saw kind of realize the true value of implementing RFID.
I've been hearing more and more about RFID. I feel like it's suddenly starting to come into play. I've found a good use case for like shoes is one where it's come up. So yeah, it'd be I'm not actually implemented it myself. So like, what's the transition like for someone if they've never, well, what even is it as a starting point?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a few years, so I'll have to refresh my memory a bit here, Kabir, but I'll do my best. But yeah, I mean, like, basically you have an RFID tag, not on the product specifically, another good example of a brand that's doing this is Uniqlo. If you ever go into their stores, they have the RFID checkouts now where you just drop your stuff in basically a bin. It says, there's 3 items here, you pay for it, right? So there's an RFID tag on each one of the product tags. It reads it, off you go.
Okay.
But, the way it worked for us, it was a bit more complicated just because, RFID is essentially a reader trying to pick up a signal. Metal blocks those signals at times, so it can be a challenge, like absolutely, depending on what type of product you're working with. Shoes, great. Like the boxes are, there's tons of empty space in there. Clothing, great, can read right through it. And you also have to make sure, like, who's doing the tagging, right? Is there a supplier doing it? Are my warehouse staff doing it? Am I going to have to ship a printer 3/4 of the way around the globe? Is it going to work? How will IT support work if something goes wrong? Who's going to pay for the tags? Where are they going to come from? So there's all kinds of inputs to it, but yeah, I mean, you got it fine tuned.
Yeah, what are the tag costs like? Is that a factor anymore? Has the cost of tags come right down? Because
I think so, and yeah, I mean, there's so many sizes as well now, right? Like I'm sure you can get one that's like a couple inches in or centimeters in diameter, whatever you want to call it.
Tags themselves have gone down, the printers have gone down, the prevalency of different sizes is there. So like it's that's the reason I think I've seen it also proliferate more is there's more options. And to Greg's point, like it's just he's more easily accessible. To Greg's point, like yes, there can be complexities in how you set it up, but the real value is that if it is done correctly, you can wave a wand and get an accurate count or a mostly accurate count. You can find a lost product in the warehouse just because it'll like beep at you and help you find it. So like it can really speed up certain processes. If you get really fine grained with it, it can be the packing and the checkout like you saw with Uniqlo. And so when you're no longer relying on a human to do the counting and cross check or like having to find a barcode and scan it, you can now just say, okay, it's a lot faster. We've seen pretty substantial time savings there.
Powerful for retail then, and like retail store stock take and doing those kinds of transfers, all that internal heavy work where you got internal people touching stuff. I guess that makes sense. What about where are 3PLs on RFID then? So like doing it in-house sounds feasible now, and I can think of like the big retailers in the UK are doing it. How ready are 3PLs if you want to introduce RFID into that?
I feel like it still has a ways to go. I mean, from what I've seen, the bigger players, sure. They likely have some brands who are coming to them and saying, hey, as part of my RFP, you need to do RFID. Sure, no problem. But I mean, your mid-size 3PL, probably not there yet. They probably don't have, or I should say, probably don't have, like, there's no brand out there who's asked them to do it yet. It's likely a conversation of, hey, can you buy some readers? It's not like they need to go and like re-network their entire warehouse. Like you get a handheld reader and just walk around, like Kabir mentioned. And it should save them time and labor as well, right? Like you could potentially even use it as like a negotiating tactic of, hey, well, you were going to charge me XYZ for labor for inventory, but if I can cut your counting time in half, well, then what does that do?
Yeah, I do wonder if there's the RFID side of things, and then I was imagining just RFID's it's taken off in places. I think it's still like certain product types, like shoes is one we mentioned, or like jewelry is a good one because it's so small. Maybe in like the really big fashion supply chains, I was curious about whether, like, at some point, the smart glasses and vision might be the way that a lot of this stuff starts to go in the warehouse.
I would be surprised if, like, in some future world, there's not some, like, augmented reality WMS where you're guiding the picker rather than them having to, like, look at a handheld, them just being told where to go based off that. Are we anywhere near there? For sure not. But, like, could that be a future? Maybe. Who knows? Maybe humanoid robots are better before then. So, like, I don't know what the future will hold. I wouldn't say it's completely out of the question. Like, everyone's been talking, as I mentioned, about robots in your warehouse for 10 years. We're just now really starting to see it, like, truly. And RFID, everyone was talking about RFID 10 years ago. We're just now starting to see it proliferated. Like, the use cases are expanding as costs go down, as implementation gets easier, as, like, the network effect of, like, okay, now maybe 3PLs are having that hardware because more brands have it and it saves them time. But before, the investment in the hardware and the investment in the training didn't make sense because no one tagged the products. So I'd say that the proliferation of the tech is getting there. Like, the one tech I saw at Manifest that was actually cool and seemed valuable was, like, computer vision has gotten a lot better. So they had drones just flying through your warehouse and taking photos of all the pallets, and you could get a pretty accurate count. But it took the tech getting way better for it to actually make sense and for you to be able to rely on the data. So I think we're still early.
When it's like the first time you've seen an idea, like the first time someone makes an idea and it's looking like it could do the thing, it usually means it's a long way from actually doing the thing. It's like still really just an idea phase, trying to get some.
And now, like, because, like, RFID, like, is more prevalent, there's more tech and infrastructure there to actually help utilize it. So I saw a new device that, as you take your cases off of the container, it'll run through, like, an RFID gate and just get accurate counts. So now you don't need to open boxes. You don't need to count, like, all of that type of stuff. As you see that, you'll be like, oh, that's hours of time saved per unload of a container.
I mean, the gap. I think one of the biggest gaps is, you think of how much funding goes into these companies. So you got all the VC and private equity going into the innovation piece. How much funding is really going into the logistics and operations departments inside brands or 3PLs? Yeah, most 3PLs are not swimming in loads of money for R&D and trying out the latest and greatest things, unless they're private equity VC backed. And, like, you've seen a bunch of them in the US in the last few years where they've raised a ton of funding, whether they're doing, like, warehouses where they brand them but they don't run the system, or they have the system and someone else is, like, almost these, like, networks and all these different formats of things. But ultimately you've got to have the money and you've got to have someone sitting in the C-suite who goes, yeah, let's go and spend $1 million on this robotics project, or should we go and do the 200k WMS that we know is going to get the ROI? And I think a big bit that comes with that is, like, someone's got to put their neck on the line for it and go, yeah, we're going to go for this. And that's the tough one. You know, whenever you get to something really edgy, everyone gets edgy.
Yeah, and it's the shiny object syndrome, as you mentioned. Like, it's a little easier to get buy-in for, like, the new tech. Oh, let me get AI, let me get robots. It's future looking. And you've got a warehouse manager saying, hey, I just want a new WMS, like, nothing that crazy. But it just seems like, oh, that's not going to move the needle. And you need, I think, one interesting piece about ops and warehousing and the world we live in is we're kind of considered cost centers of, like, it's just the necessary evil to get things done. But what I think is great when warehouse management is done effectively is it actually can be a revenue driver. Like, the way you talked about, like, a high touch packing experience, that's because it delighted the customer, because you put that work in, you made sure it was a good experience, and doing that right and making sure you're constantly in stock, you're getting orders out on time, that then creates brand loyalty. And so I'd say switching that dynamic, and I think that's been a common trend of good ops is a revenue driver, is something that's a really hard conversation to have for a lot of e-commerce brands, and they don't consider it that way, but they should be.
Yeah.
It's the classic case of, like, you know, supply chain and ops in general is, like, where companies spend a ton of money. And yeah, I think, you know, even though, like, a 3PL as an example, could be like, they are essentially an extension of your brand. right? Like you want them to be shipping on time, in full. You don't want them to be shorting orders. You don't want a bunch of mispicks going out the door. If it's a multi-client facility, you don't want your customer to get a completely different brand's product. All of those are, obviously terrible customer experiences. I think if they've got their ducks in a row and they're doing a good job, or even if you're doing it yourself, right? Like those are some of the key things you need to keep an eye on. Are my CX tickets blowing up? And is it operations' fault?
It's usually marketing's fault.
How was your dynamic, and what were teams that you tended to work well with, or maybe other teams where there was like a common kind of clashing? I mean, I have some like that ops I tend to see, but like I'm curious, was that something that you felt could make or break how you work with different teams?
I wouldn't say it's clash. I think it's key to understand there's like a common problem that your teams are trying to work towards solving, right? Sure, nobody wants to hear, hey, warehouse, you guys screwed up 10 orders this week. What are you doing? That's where you can sit down and do some analysis. Okay, like maybe you bring up the 5 whys. Well, why did we misship this? Why did they mispick it? Why did this defect get out the door? Whatever the case might be. It's important to get that feedback to understand where you can improve, because there's always room to do better. Your operation will almost never be perfect. Things are going to go wrong. So, you're always going to be close with your customer experience team. Depending on how you work with seemingly Oliver's best friend, the marketing team. You might have some influencer pushes to get out the door, promo periods that you're going to have to align on, get the sales forecast down, understand how much labor you're going to need to bring in potentially if needed, or how much longer you might need to keep the doors open to keep everyone happy. I think, again, it's really important to just take like a collaborative mindset as opposed to a combative one where you get really defensive and, ops is blamed for everything. It's like, well, we're doing our best over here, guys,
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. And you can't beat a shared calendar between teams. You actually know what's going on. Just aligning on dates is so fundamental, but everything is the biggest thing in retail versus almost any other bit. I mean, anyone servicing retail businesses is living that calendar as well, but like other services industries just don't have a calendar in the same way. And actually so much of what we do is hanging around these key moments in the year and building up to it or coming off it. I think there's a lot to be gained just from that view of things, which is what's lying ahead, because those dates never change from year to year. It's always the same. It's always the same pitch points.
Exactly.
The amount of times I've seen where like marketing just didn't tell ops that a sale was running, and it's like, oh, if I'd known, I would have moved that to be closer to the packing stations because I know those items are going to fly off the shelf. Like, it's some foresight. So Oliver, to your point, well, you would think it would go without saying, it doesn't. And just making sure teams have the right visibility shared can make such a big difference. Well, as we maybe get close to the end here, maybe we can go through some kind of rapid fire. I love getting kind of your quick. Again, don't worry, we're not going to hold you to these, but some of these can be pretty interesting. First one, do you remember a time where there was like a fire in the warehouse or like some urgent escalation, things went wrong? Any funny stories that you've had to deal with warehousing?
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind is I had somebody processing returns. The 0 key on their keyboard got stuck. And instead of receiving 1 unit back into the WMS, I think they received around 1 trillion. So obviously the finance team was wondering what was going on and why our inventory was wrong and why our balance sheet was wrong. I remember putting in a ticket for that one, Kabir. It's probably still in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think I have a vague recollection of that one. And thankfully, it was only caught by your finance team. It's not like you oversold by a few thousand orders or units or anything like that. If there's one advice you could give to people who are kind of starting their own warehouse or aren't as familiar with these warehouse processes, what's kind of one mistake you wish you had learned from or knew in advance?
I think it's something I alluded to earlier, is just having that, like, you know, kind of concrete, maybe call it 3 to 5 year plan of what you want your building to look like. Especially if your business is growing very quickly, right? Like maybe you didn't take on enough space, maybe you took on too much space, maybe, you should put racking in your warehouse from the start as opposed to 3 years in, whatever the case might be. Just, do it right, and do it right from the start is definitely what I would say.
Love it. And then finally, in terms of kind of scaling, hiring, putting in the right processes in place, like any advice there for people who are growing quickly?
Yeah, I think if it's in-house, I'm going to use a hockey analogy here. So, I think you need some people. It's like your third line players, the true like grit grinders who are just going to like put their head down and get stuff done. Like whatever is asked of them. Like, hey, I need you to go pick for today because this person called in sick and we're getting slammed with orders. Yep, no problem, done. And then the next day you have them, tweaking automation rules, your WMS. It really is that like in the weeds, in the mud, whatever you want to call it, attitude that goes a long way, especially during those like crunch times of the year.
Every high-paced environment needs that. It's not a warehouse thing, is it? That's just like a lot of the things that are true in warehouse and fulfillment, because it's so people oriented. I think a lot of them are just reminders about what every business needs. It's just so evident in a warehouse because if you can literally see it when those things aren't being done.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that is like it's not for everyone, and that's totally fine, right? Like scaling ops is stressful. It can be time consuming, right? Like your work-life balance might not be great for a little bit. There's a lot that can go wrong, but there's a lot that can go right as well. It's very rewarding, great for career growth as well. Definitely sets you on a good trajectory if you're able to pull it off.
Yeah, it's a great way to understand the like inputs and outputs of a good customer experience from the ground up. Yeah. So it's definitely a lot of the people that are strongest in supply chain operations that I've worked with, they've got that foundational experience, like from warehouse fulfillment all the way up. It seems to be a pretty proven route for people in terms of career.
Yeah, you probably have gone through the ringer a couple of times, but you come out the other side stronger, and generally you learn those lessons, or you learn from your mistakes and build upon them as well.
Greg, this was awesome. I think I learned a lot. I think all of our listeners will be able to take away something. And it was great getting to learn from your experience and talk about all these fun topics. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Kabir. Thanks, Oliver. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, awesome. Great to meet you. Thanks so much, Greg.